There are economies across Asia that are starting to slow down. However, many people are not too concerned because this is still the era of Asian-led consumption growth. Earlier today, I had an exclusive interview with World Bank Managing Director Sri Mulyani, who told me that growth of over 6% is still very good, and in fact, it is a luxury that some economies today can only dream of.
The immediate impact is certainly coming from their demand for import goods, and that has already hurt many countries. I mean, you can see that China is slowing down, Asean in general also slowing down, and the China slowing down is also have the impact for many of commodity prices, many countries who also supply. So we see that from the trade channel is the most direct one.
Indonesia's economy grew by 6.2% last year. It was amongst one of the best performers when we look at all the Asian economies. But the country still has a lot of problems. We know corruption is still rife, exports are weak, and recently it posted its first trade deficit in almost 50 years. As the former finance minister of Indonesia, what do you think policymakers in Indonesia can do today to really address all those problems?
It was designed by many developing countries in actually responding to the global financial crisis 2008-2009, which shifted their policy by nurturing more domestic demand growth. And for Indonesia, with the size of population and economy, they can do that. So they are now relying more on the investment as well as the consumption. The problem with those policy strategies is actually if you are not putting enough effort and fast enough, you are going to easily overheating, because when you do the domestic demand driven growth, you should be matched by the supply side. So they are going to have a more or less harmonious both sides growth, which is not going to ignite price that then create inflation. That, I think, is going to be the challenge for Indonesia. The second one is, of course, you can see from the balance of payment, the current account, especially also the trade account. That's really mainly because in the past, and I think is even still currently, Indonesia still rely more on a natural resource export rather than the export which is driven by manufacturing and the derived sophisticated product. That is going to be the challenge.
China's housing bubble is extremely alarming at the moment. In fact, many spectators worry that if this bubble bursts, it could have catastrophic effects around the world. Do you think China's housing bubble will potentially burst?
The response of the policy in China from the global financial crisis, in which the global economy is going down very sharply, by doing the expansionary policy both on the fiscal and monetary side. It was right in 2009-2010, and that's why they need to consolidate it, and they are now consolidating. It cannot reverse immediately all what you've done in the past 2-3 years. So we have to deal with the consequence now. So for China, definitely in this case, they knew that the consequence of expansionary policy to do the counter-cyclical is actually now appearing in this one specific sector, which is on the property. It creates a lot of complication because it linked to the local government revenue side. The local government is really rely on their selling land for the property in this case as their source of revenue. It can also hit the vulnerability of the financial system, banking system. So for the policymaker there, really try to manage this bubble or correcting the price to the level which is perceived as the fair price rather than excessive price that then create a lot of complication. It will take time.
So as you can see there, Michelle, Sri Mulyani really iterating the fact that the ongoing debt crisis in the 17-nation Eurobloc is having an impact on the emerging economies, specifically when it comes to trade, and this is reflected in exports and imports and even in some of their current account figures. But overall, you know, these emerging economies are still growing really rapidly, and so the impact is being cushioned by the GDP growth that they're having. Many argue that a lot of these emerging economies are economic superpowers in their own right, and some of them, like China and Japan, even rival the United States when it comes to global economic and trade influence.
Ongoing European debt crisis continues to hit the fragile global recovery, but the World Bank says the Southeastern Asian economies are well prepared to handle the impact. Managing Director Sri Mulyani saying that ASEAN nations have the right policies to survive.
The ASEAN country who is very resilient to the crisis, they still have the ability to maneuver from their own policy space, whether this is on a fiscal side or monetary side. And that is very important. The other thing which is also the message which is very important for the ASEAN economy is that they have invested in a reform, whether this is in investing on a human capital, whether this is improving on infrastructure. That need to be continued. That is going to be the best preparation whether you are going to have a crisis or not. And with that, they are going to be prepared for anything that could happen.
How concerned are you on the European banks repatriating their capital out of Asia?
The European bank and financial institution is playing about 1/3 on those project financing and trade financing. What is good news is actually many of the ASEAN banking and financial institutions has already replaced when this capital outflow coming from the banking system in European is happening since late last year. So they are now replaced by China, Singapore, Australia, or even Japanese. So this is already happened. So there is a substitute of financing.
What about Chinese economic slowdown then? Do you think the so-called China hard landing is possible at all?
The perception which needs to be corrected. The China economy, when they are moving from the 10% growth or above 10% growth, double-digit growth, into 8%, I'm not going to say that it's a hard landing or slowing down. I think this is more, you call it adjustment, because they understand that their growth model is not sustainable if using the same pattern in the past 30 years. And there is a consequence if you change their growth model. And if they are now heading to 7.5%, I think it's going to be also adjustment which is necessary to have what you call it sustainable but high quality growth, more inclusive, which is actually needed for China economy.